you're going to introduce and give them sort of the purpose, and then just say, well, let's start something about what you might tell us something of your beginnings and your interest in research methods.
Okay. This is an interview with Jen Carter by Maurice Hamovitch. And what we want to talk about today, Jen, is go back in terms of your early interest in research, particularly related to social welfare, and particularly on your experiences in California. So could you start by sharing something of how you got involved in research, social welfare research specifically?
When I start with how I became involved in research is not too specifically related to social welfare, because I had worked in animal psychology for quite a while before I discovered people, so my interest was in the issues that could be researched with animals, and I was engaged in left and right-handedness, which had direct relevance for human subjects. I was fortunate to have as my mentor an experimental psychologist, we might call him, who had a great interest in students. And as an undergraduate, he encouraged me and suffered with me while I co-authored with him 2 articles that were published in Experimental Psychology. And to see my name in print is something I'll just never forget. So I think the earlier that teachers and all can encourage and can lead students to publish, the more lasting will the teachings in research methodology be. So it was sometime later that when I left the undergraduate work and master's, and then went in during the war to Manzanar, Japanese relocation camp, and that has been discussed in another interview with John Milner. So we'll begin as I left Manzanar and came to the Welfare Planning Council in Los Angeles, where they were recruiting a research director. At this time, coming from just social sciences or educational psychology, which was one of my majors, was a fair background for the status of research in social welfare or
Jen,
social
excuse me, what year was that?
It was about 8 or 9 months before the war was over. Because I remember hanging out on the window in Community Chest on Figueroa Street and waiting for, I don't know, balloons or firecrackers or something, but everybody wanted to get into some kind of action because the war was over. And we could get back down from all of the war deprivation and interest and whatnot to our jobs and thinking about planning and program development, because things had been at a standstill during the war, particularly in the field of social welfare and agency services and all.
So this would be late 44, early 45?
Yes. If I were to go back and think where we stood at that time, I would say that our first influence in developing some kind of research-based or interest in social work or social welfare was in statistics. A few things had happened in the late 20s. The Trovis Bureau had set up the Bureau, what they call the Reporting Statistical Project, which was a big step. And some said, oh, that is the beginning of the measurement of social work. Well, it was a very early step, but it did begin to count people served and either office visits or individual services. And it did begin to get some idea where you could collect by numbers and then see comparisons in development in any one place and between places. There were, I think, 13 reporting areas across the country. Interesting enough, at that time, the public agencies and what we call the public welfare programs didn't keep their own statistics. It was sort of a catch-as-catch-can, and the Children's Bureau projects had reporting forms, and we collected the statistics for the public agency and published trends and so on for them. Then later on, they said, well, why don't we do our own? We should do our own statistics. So the public agency then began keeping its own statistics, and by that time the federal government had begun to develop some forms for the states to report on their public welfare services. So that counting, I suppose, and numbers began, I would say, with the Children's Bureau and the Census Bureau, because there were committees, for example, who worked together to get disabilities or retarded children, or a few of the categories, or institutionalized children, or juvenile homes. At that time, we didn't go very far in, I'd say, delinquency statistics or in prison statistics. But it was the beginning of trying our qualification, I think we could say. And even today, we would claim that if you can define it, you probably can quantify it. And I think that's still good.
Jen, excuse me, what attracted you to the Welfare Planning Council job?
Well, there were two things, I suppose, operating. The war was over. Wanted to come back to Los Angeles. My husband was getting out of service. We wanted to be here in Los Angeles. Here, I didn't know much about Welfare Planning Council work, but the explanations of it and the fact that they wanted a person to develop a research program, I think primarily interested me because of my earlier background in experimental research. I will say that experimental method wasn't too usable at that time.
And how large a department was it? Were you it?
No, I think there were Helen Dean, who was the her name just comes to me quickly, was the former director, and she wanted more time to do some writing. She was involved in a history of social welfare, but this has been a very elusive kind of document. Nobody's been able to locate this history of social welfare in the Los Angeles area, which would be very important for your history project if this could be found. But I liked the idea too of the community organization and the committee work. One of my first appointments, I was chairman of the Japanese Relocation Committee. So that wasn't too closely related to the work of the research department, but it was certainly related to my experience working with Japanese in the relocation camp at Manzanar. One interesting thing that did come out of that, I don't want to get too far in following up with the relocation center, but the establishment of the Japanese children's home in Little Tokyo raised an issue. There were some of the child welfare experts there in the council who would say that no longer do we segregate children in an institution by age or particularly by race. But in this instance, because the Japanese who were coming from the camp where they had more or less been not rejected, but had lost a lot of their prestige, and had been wanted something positive and community-centered to be identified with, wanted their own Japanese children's home. So it did start that way. Later on, it was integrated with the care of children generally. But that did. We had several conferences. At that time, it was a matter of just estimating how many children might be in the Japanese children's home, and the fact that at Manzanar, we did have the center for all children of Japanese blood who were relocated in 3 buses and from 3 different orphanages up and down the state, and were held in Manzanar. And then they wanted to carry on the work and bring these children into a little Tokyo center, which I served this purpose, and it brought back pride.
What was the function of the research department within the Welfare Planning Council, and how did it relate to the community chess?
The research department carried on some functions for the community chest, primarily connected with campaign, and also connected with the distribution of the services by geographic locations, which served as information and facts gathered to indicate if you give, everybody gives, everybody receives. Slogan of the chest, and to bring together the statistics that were being collected at that time. That was part of the core of the research department when I first came in. Very soon there were committees, and there were several requests for studies of need and for evaluating the programs of the chest member agencies as to their effectiveness and the distribution of their services. There were a few requests for, is there a need for a certain type of service? At that time, there was just beginning to be an interest in the distribution of services in relation to age groups, ethnic, race, and all. And at first we heard the slogan, well, services agencies are not influenced by color, which meant you didn't know anything. You just with the idea of protecting people from being classified by some racial group, which is the only way you can ever find out if you are doing the right thing or not. So one of the, I was thinking of some of the other kinds of requests. One mechanism used that we don't have anymore, and there was one of the studies determined that it was time for it to go, and that was the social service exchange. That is not heard of so much anymore, because there were professional reasons why. That if the client couldn't give you the information himself, well, then you probably couldn't make very much use of it. That was one of the claims. And then the fact that there was a concern about duplication in use of relief money or financial assistance. But later on, as the public agencies began to pick up their index of clients and had less reliance on the voluntary agencies and the chest, then there was less for the voluntary agencies to do. You see, at that time, one of the important studies would be youth services and divisions in the council, because voluntary agencies were providing over half of the youth services and recreation services in the county or in the Los Angeles area. Now that, as I left the council, and say 15 years later, we found at that time then the public agencies and the government, federal, state, county, were then providing in social welfare and public welfare 85% of the services going to people. So that the big role of the voluntary agencies changed during my years here, and then planning then began to be a little more specialized with hospital planning, and then tying planning into reimbursement of federal dollars for monies expended, or for requests for federal dollars help in building new buildings, new services, and particularly in the health area. I think the health area, the health services, medical and so on, broke away from planning as an integrated center for an urban area like this first. And then later on, the child welfare, health, and the recreational services and the family services began to splinter off. Perhaps one of the pioneer things where Los Angeles area contributed so much, and the research department did much of the work, was as a basis for planning and developing what was called the Youth Project. Because in addition to statistics and counting and volume of people and services and so on, demography was one of the avenues of research and techniques and methods and so on that we used at that time. So for the first time, we were interested in the distribution of services, and when they were coded for the addresses of who was receiving youth services, YMCA, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Campfire Girls, and so on, they found that where the services were the heaviest, then the families were middle income and middle class families. Where there was the poorest and the largest families, the demographic data showed that there were fewer services where there were the more people and the poorest people. At that time, I'd have to mention too that the technology has certainly changed. Most people have forgotten what the MacB cards looked like. The little holes around the card, and it followed the theory of the computers today. That is quantifying data into yes, no, or how many spaces, and then using knitting needles, so that's what they look like, to count, and you had to always make your cards come out even, or you'd lose out. We used to call that card sorting, and we would be like idiots delight. Also, we used a sorter, and the sorter would take 10 or 11 classes or categories and sort them, and then you would have to pick them up and count them, how many cards fell in these various little cubicles, so that you came out with your sorting. And we had what was called a gang punch. And a gang punch was something like a foot pedal, and you put your cards in the top, and if you wanted to punch a whole group of cards for yes or no, or boy or girl, or where you could just go right through a big stack. That would save you a lot of this hand punching where you had to do each card separately. So that it proved satisfactory for that time. And as the next development was the sorter, then after a while we began to move into more technical kinds of machinery. But I think those days were kind of interesting because we used to sit in a committee meeting and with our knitting needles and cards and listen with one ear and then punch through the holes with our hands while this went on. And we felt that we were quite advanced technically to be able to handle a larger mass of data than just little piles of paper. We've gone through a lot since then.
Now, when you first came, you mentioned that there were how many people in the research department?
I would say about 3 or 4 professionals, a librarian, who also usually did some of the clerical work, and a secretary, which was a fairly good-sized
That's a fairly sophisticated department
for that time. And I think it was an interesting time in social work too, because social workers certainly very clinically oriented, and most of them had somewhat of an aversion to figures and numbers and statistics and even fractions and division. Well, you'd have to go back to through some of the math if you were teaching a class in statistics. And some would identify research just with statistics or just with demography. And it wasn't until the theory from the various social sciences sort of began to pour in that the concept of what was research or what was research method began to enlarge and increase. But that was true across the country. That historical method, I think, was more advanced for social work research at that time in the 40s and 50s. There were such projects going on. You can recall the Step Paul project and the family-centered project, where there was a family card, something like a McBee card, where some of these statistics were kept where you could count and get the volume, and then add or get variations and differences between parts of the city, or with the services that were available or utilized. And it came out in that study, as well as numerous others to follow, where we had the slogan, 5 to 7% of the people get 95% of the services. So that some of these things have been repeated with the kind of issues that we keep having over and over, like reinventing the wheel. In the 60s, particularly, those are the years. So I was in Washington as director of the research program in health education and welfare, where welfare reform was the big thing, and poverty. Numerous demonstration projects. And it's interesting how this keeps coming back, and this second or third round on welfare reform is around the corner now. Whenever, and the answer has been almost the same each time. So we have training programs, we had the WIN programs, we evaluated different, very ingenious and some very challenging kinds of demonstrations. Well, we kept coming out with, if there are no jobs at the end of this tunnel, well, how much better, how much more have you improved the situation? And it also seems to me that there's a philosophy there. Do you cause your own poverty, your own unemployment? Then if you're the cause of it, you could be corrected, or your character modified a little bit, your ambition and your motivation and so on. We had a lot of motivation studies, where motivation is always inside the person and not in the setting or in other kinds of things. So that, or is it something that is a socio-economic structure or influences where the same kinds of things are across the country happening that causes people to lose their jobs, industry changes, or what was now we'll say it's the farmers and the dairy people and so on that are the ones who are trying to find their way in the economy and being unemployed. I suppose they'll be getting into the next round of studies as to welfare reform. But I don't know why every time it comes out that the cause probably lies in the economy or the social system or something, that we stop. And nobody wants to pursue it further. And it keeps coming up that way.
Tell me, going back to the welfare planning, the research part in the Welfare Planning Council, you told me about the role in the community chest. What was the role of the department in the Welfare Planning Council, and as director, what were your roles, and what were you able to do, and what were you not able to do that you would have liked to have done, and what were some of the accomplishments?
Oh, that's a rather...
There's a lot of questions
have
in
to
there.
break it up.
But,
I'd say first, you're overly ambitious usually when you try to set goals for a department. In thinking that a research project or a study project will of itself implement the findings. And this has been shown over and over again that, well, we used to say that if this is the policy direction and you do have a good research study to back it up, then you're on your way. But if you have a research study that is not in line with current policy and funding, it could be a great one, and it could be truth, and it could be the accurate findings and all, but it doesn't motivate per se to bring about any change. So I think we learn to temper our goals a little bit, at least I know I did, that you present certain facts and information, and usually the council method was to have a study committee would be volunteers and leaders and professionals from agencies. It would be a variety of people representing different interests and who were interested in the survey or the research. And they would be the sounding board to receive progress reports, and particularly the final report of the findings of an inquiry, or if maybe just observations that are systematic. We'd also have the staff role was fairly well defined too. The technical staff person, suppose we're getting into a study that requires a questionnaire, would first work with the committee group, and the committee would have their input, would begin to offer questions. What are the issues? What do we want to know? Why do we want to know this? Can we find this kind of information? Are the data available, and so on? And then the staff person, the technical person, after having a draft and getting some of these things noted down, would go off and do the questionnaire construction. It takes one integrated brain to pull a questionnaire together. And you learn that quite early, that committees don't constructing a questionnaire is not a function of a committee. What was the story about the report two humped camel that's put together by a committee? Well, that's what the technical person has to be very brave at that point and say, you've contributed, I think, enough that you've helped me so much, now I must go off and put the thing together. And and knowing when to pull it out and to go off and then begin the questionnaire construction or whatever instrument you're going to use. Then I think the other important help that you get from a committee of this nature as community centered are two things. One, that they're the sounding board, and some of the bugs begin to show that there must be something wrong. That doesn't fit, so that common sense is brought to the table, and in the writing of the report, particularly in the interpretation, not doesn't affect the figures of the numbers so much. Then the committee is also very important in terms of implementation, and if it has to go to the budget committee for funds, or if it has to be for interpreting the results to agencies that are in jeopardy of losing some of their money, or perhaps even their place as a community chest member. The committee, they're called in. They can be called in, and you'll have other people, other voices, and others to add to the credibility of what has been written. Now, that's a pattern that's used quite frequently, and is still used in, say, a state task force. Mm-hmm. Can be, or it could be in a local county committee. So the planning councils across the country more or less use this participation method along with the studies. It isn't like a 3-year study where a large research staff is busy producing more or less of a theoretically based study, or one that has, we'll say, several middle-range hypotheses, and the product is strictly very much the research team. You may have just a committee to hear about it or sponsor it, but it does incorporate the opinions and the tempering sometimes of the committee in the interpretation, and the names are always on the publication. And I don't know if that continues so much today as it did in the 40s and 50s, but I think it was the participation in the study, I think, was a very good experience for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Now, how many of the, you're describing studies that the research department got involved with that are initiated by the planning staff. How about were there studies that you initiated, and was there the same involving of the planning staff in those?
Not always. I think one of the most interesting things we did was in the earlier days, before the census data began to be placed on computer systems, particularly at a university where you could go in and get any kind of run that you wanted, where it was a lot of manual figuring to work up the census data and buy planning tracts for a county, then to summarize this and have some kind of interpretation of the community, usually a named community. You see, Los Angeles area has often been called 75 communities in search of a city. Mm-hmm. Well, it's still something like that, but it was much more so then. So we'd have the planning areas, and we would more or less interpret the findings demographically for that county. And this was a publication that was a staff publication. But we used to have people come in, that is, market people. They want to know where are the young families that we can sell silverware to, or something. Then later on, we were not the keepers of the census data for the Los Angeles area. That was a pioneer effort. Later on, the census data would be housed in a university setting where there's much more use of computer programming. We did other studies that might be compiling, we'll say, research results, the knowledge base of perhaps new methods in institutional care or adoptions or something along that line that would be informative for our particular area. But if it involved decisions for action as to in developing a program, enlarging a program, or meeting a new need, or decreasing funds, or encouraging an agency to change its purpose to another purpose that would more nearly meet the needs today, where action should follow, then it was more likely that there'd be a committee or a task force attached to it. We did feel, and this was also true when I was in federal government, that in some instances the research staff on their own credentials could bring out a publication that had importance for a new look or new methods or the results of demonstrations that they wouldn't hear about unless somebody brought it together and made it available.
Now, what kinds of, can you think about some of the major studies that came out? Because as I recall, there were a number of outstanding studies that came through.
Oh, I think we were
during that period.
The first research study that I know of to go into what we call time studies. It's interesting that some of the things that came out in the earlier pioneer days were now better done by marketing firms or opinion poll types of firms, so that things that we did then are picked up by other more expertise, and we would probably deal more with them. I'd say creative work was done with demonstrations, homemaker service. I can think of, I don't know why this comes to me, but we had it involved the public agencies and some of our pioneers there who were interested in. Francis Spellman was one of them, connected with the first program of homemakers, and we were doing follow-up studies with the clients, and that was also new too, to follow up and ask clients how they liked the service or did it help any, and so on. And this one father that we interviewed, yes, they had a homemaker, said it was probably at the wrong time, said, well, what things have happened, thinking of the good things that happened. He said, well, I guess my wife and I have gotten a divorce, and all of his responses were from bad to worse. And then he said, but, I figure that this is a demonstration, and you folks you'll make mistakes now and then. We just happen to be one of them. So that we found out, new things by going what we call to the horse's mouth. So that the field was wide open. Whatever you wanted to try out for experimentation or demonstration, or in methods, you were free to. That was the one nice thing. Now things I think are much more. When you get money for a particular grant, everything is spelled out now.
But didn't you do something? Didn't you pioneer in terms of some of the needs assessment studies and the methodology?
Yes, we did some work with an index, or indices, and then factors in what we call community need. That is, it would be in relation to how many, children or the poverty level and so forth, getting out of where you could quantify with 4 or 5 factors that most people agree would influence what we might would take the concept of need and then break it down into these influences that affected more or less need. And then we'd even you could map it too, geographically. But that type of community need and planning would be so much different now from what we call a clinical assessment. And the factors that go into, we'll say, the need of an older person now at home for support help, so that he could stay longer at home and delay institutionalization, let's say. So that, but it's still the same kind of concepts and thinking.
Do you feel that's going on now within? Where is it being done? Is it being done in welfare planning councils or United
No,
Way
not in
agencies?
welfare planning councils now. I would say it's being done more by program. I think we did learn over the years that if a planning council or a central place for planning extends too far and over too many diverse interest disciplines and so on, that it sort of falls of its own weight. That there are more what we call like domains of planning: hospital planning, institutional planning, planning for health facilities, planning for, we'll say, taking adoptions and making a sort of a system approach in that to see where the sources are of referral and the connections and the various institutions that would be involved together. So you're drawing sort of a system delivery domains and taking sort of one at a time, or taking major areas, even though it's sequential or at the same time. But we aren't trying to do anymore the great community survey and the of needs and needs assessment and the great community plan to fulfill those community needs. And I think the expression used to be, well, community organization is really balancing needs and resources. You know, just real simple, like, oh, Steve.
Well,
No, I have, is it off?
no, that's okay. Let me put it on.
Okay, I get it.
Okay. I never did find it.
Huh? Well, now that the sneeze is over.
Okay. All right. We'll keep going.
I think we could proceed. That was unrehearsed, that part of it. So that we have done some distinguishing, haven't we, about knowledge building and the accruing knowledge and so on, as something a little different about knowledge or fact-finding that we do for action, and for social policy. That later we didn't use the concept of social policy until it must have been around in 1960 in there. I don't know, what did we call it? What do you think? What did we call what we call social policy now? We did call it sort of more in terms of, well, we had legislation, and we had procedures, and we had regulations. I guess that would be part of it. But we had advocacy, even back, we'll say, in the days of the rock-making surveys, or whatever, the snake pit studies and the prison studies and all, where a board or a group of citizens would go in to visit and then collect some facts and statistics, counting numbers. We did find out that you couldn't use just a case study. You had to have some numbers, so that we did do the social surveys. And I think we improved on that, and that went on for quite a while until, as I say, it got too burdensome. We tried to do too much with one kind of survey. So now we're more specialized, and this is true for example, I have, and we still get mixed up on this, because take Medicaid funds. Because Medicaid funds pay for both, we'll say, the elderly in their own homes and family care. Also, Medicaid pays for disabled, handicapped. And we try to put them together to say, we want to integrate the services and then do the study together and survey together, but they are so different in their clinical base, and the professionals who provide the content for rehabilitation and vocational rehabilitation especially are very different from the gerontologist group and the social gerontologists too. The knowledge base for the elderly that we found I think we can't put that much together and come out with any kind of clarity. Their advocacy is different, and their constituencies are very different when they go to the legislature or to the community chest or wherever to get funding. And the same thing at the federal level. We're guided a lot by the constituencies of various groups and groups of services and needs by the advocacy pathways and the connections and linkages to get the money. I think we're more money conscious too today.
Yeah.
Would you think so?
Sure are. But I think we always have been.
In the community chest days, it seems that they're sort of established. Maybe we claim too much for Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and so forth. We were more naive in our beliefs about if you provide certain services, then you would prevent delinquency or recreation of delinquency. We've gone through all of those things, and we really can't find the connection of cause and change in behavior, so that we don't make the claims that we used to make. So maybe in that way, each has to go his own way, and the sources of funds and what moves people one decade to give money for.
Genevieve Carter about her experiences in the Welfare Planning Council. And what I wanted to ask you, Jen, was something of your experience in regard to other parts of the community. We've talked about the community chest, we talked about the Welfare Planning Council and the way in which you interacted with those organizations. What about other parts of the community, like the academic community, the social work or other academic community, and also in relation to what contributions you made in terms of your staff, and how they interacted, and what happened to them?
Well, I think there's a lot that can be said there in terms of pioneering and influencing and developing students and developing research skills, and also I'd say some of the practical aspects of research and survey work. I recall, let's take one that most of the people in this locality know, Ernest Greenwood, who came to Los Angeles after authoring his book and getting his doctor's degree in experimental sociology, which is a notch or two away from the we'll say doing a time study in a family service agency, or bringing a group of executives together to determine whether or not family casework can be done more effectively. So that and bringing somebody who has let's say some advanced skills, particularly in theory. We were always searching for, at what point do we begin to connect up with some of the social science theory, so that someone like Ernest, I used to call him my orchid, because only certain kinds of things that he was ready to start with, because of a certain sense of purity he had in carrying out his goals and methodology. The problem so often in where we all strive, not just one person, to follow the model of the experimental method and the controlled approach, is that we just don't have the concepts defined, and it takes a little digging and a little grubby work to begin to get ready to even do a social survey. Ernest brought us a very helpful background in, I'd say, in the social sciences and social theory. I think he began to like it whenever he found, I got this direct association with people, and in watching some of the findings that we produced being implemented in the agencies. Whenever he went on back to academia, and I think that he took with him a lot of practical ideas, particularly about social welfare services, agencies, and clients. So that in one way, bringing in the social scientists has an interaction with the staff and with the social scientists who's brought in. Then we had block placements. Several, there were at least two universities who offered a doctor's degree in social work or social welfare, and since the clinical people had a year of internship or a field work placement at a higher level, more or less as an intern, one of them was Sid Zemelis, as I recall it, and we had another one, I can't think of his name right now.
Yavin?
Probably, yes. He was a very creative young guy with lots of ideas. Well, for one of them, for instance, why don't we pay delinquents not to be delinquent? And we had a fund, and I think it would work better than all of the casework that we would do. Just pay them off, and they'll behave. So that the fieldwork students then took on quite a bit of responsibility. They would come in practically by themselves or a study, and they would at the same time do some of the work in demography and service statistics, some of the routine things of a council. But the important thing that I think they did learn was something about the community agencies and community behavior and the flow of money and how agencies stayed in business or they did not stay in business, some of the practical things. Now, I had probably all, including the USC School of Social Work and the master's level placements, a number of 5, 6, 7 more researchers who went through the Planning Council Research Department and had their training and their development. They used to call them Carter's boys, and say, well, that was one of Carter's boys. But I was proud to have these young men that I had worked with, and to see them go ahead and advance and take advantage and develop in a sort of applied situation like a planning council. Most of all of the people who were associated with planning council research, and especially the administrators, also had, I'd say, quite a scholarly aptitude. And they were already teaching at the universities, or they taught classes. I know I was community organization and research methods were 2 classes that I taught off and on. Taught even in when I went to Washington. I still taught one class. Sometimes I call it my mental health exercise, because it was good to have these eager students to welcome you with what you had to offer, when you had to always in an applied situation where you were exposed to the community, had to work hard to get your relationships established. Whereas in a class, it's already there for you. All you have to do is to develop it. Furthermore, I would say some of us who were in the Planning Council research business at that time were very interested in seeing the development of research in the schools of social work, particularly in the faculties. For a time, the schools of social work brought in a person with research discipline to teach, I suppose, what would be sort of called generally research methods to the social workers. And that wasn't easy in those days. Number one, we didn't have the content very well organized for research methods class. And number two, social workers weren't just eager and asking and crying to have some more statistics or research methods, or to have a master's thesis, or to get involved in group research. Somehow, sometimes in earlier stages, measurement and statistics, or we'll say qualification, was unprofessional in a sense that it didn't really lend itself to individualization. Well, working toward individualization and then working toward categories, groups, and classification is sort of something that sometimes uses opposite sides of your brain. But this was part of the thinking and really the ambitions of most of us, was to see the schools of social work getting their own faculty, and those who were perhaps teaching other methods class and practice classes developed research to where it was not just something imported every now and then, but it was a part of the core of the curriculum and the faculty. And I think that the Welfare Planning Council research people served a purpose, a transition purpose, while the schools of social work were building up and developing their research within the faculty. At the same time, across the country, those of us who were engaged in research departments and planning councils organized ourselves into a group called a SWRG, Social Work Research Group. Now, I think that's probably an unknown word or a group of letters to most social workers now in ASW and so on, because this was an attempt then to nationally and through the membership of the national membership of social workers to begin to integrate research and practice, so that for 15 years I went back and forth from Los Angeles to New York, and then later I think a couple of times to Washington with the National Association of Social Workers, and that was always an important goal too of those of us who served on the board and who served as chairman of the various sections. Community organization, for instance, as it was a separate section at that time earlier, was very involved in community surveys and in studies of, we didn't call it service systems then or delivery systems, but we did see it as integrated service coordination and so on for a particular client, or in a community whereby the services and the agencies were integrated and cooperating and could work together. So that SWRG continued, I would say, for maybe 8 or 9 years, and it developed a grandfather clause. I think those who had not completed a master's degree in social work, I believe, were incorporated into the membership organization. And later on, that didn't seem to make much difference. Because as time went on, you weren't seen as something different or a different kind of person than those who came through casework. Mm-hmm. Casework was sort of social work at one time, or vice versa. But later on, as the schools of social work broadened the kind of products they were producing, they had a wide range of skills and experiences in field work and so on, so that some were more adept in research and wanted to continue it, and some were better and wanted to continue their practice. So SWRG does have a place in the history of the development of research, and a large part of SWRG's development and of the research for the profession has its base in planning council research.
What about, you mentioned you were active in SWRG, you were also active in the community organization group. How would you identify the research director in the planning council or the community chest? Research or community organization, or hybrid, or what? And were you equally accepted in both groups, I guess?
I think so at that time, because I was very curious about this area called a community organization, and it was considered a method, as we call it, in social work. It's casework, group work, or community organization. The group worker can be just as interested in research, and so can a caseworker. But the community organization worker has more demands to also be able to identify a problem, to define it in terms of what kind of fact-finding or information is needed for action or for program development, and to determine within what resources can you do a survey, or can you validate need. That was always one of the expressions, and usually that involves some kind of systematic inquiry. Whether or not you use 110% pure research, it has to be systematic. So I would say, as to the qualifications of a researcher in the planning council work or in a community organization setting, you'd be a rather lonesome person without knowing how to organize and how to get the people together who had the problem, to define it, to define the kind of units that you were going to be involved with, and then to predict what kind of a report or what facts and information do you have that the decision makers as to budget or to resources would need to have to make a good decision about program development or for the delivery of the services. So I would say that for the community organization worker, the person who's in the community and that's your setting, that you almost have to have the combination.
Now, am I remembering correctly that you were director of the Welfare Planning Council for a while, weren't you?
Yes.
Okay, now how did that come about, and how were you seen? And isn't that unusual? I mean, the connection is there that you point out, but do you know of any other research directors who ever became directors of the planning part of it?
That's like asking, do I know of another woman across the United States that ever became a planning director? No,
okay.
Not at that time.
Okay.
There was one in Canada, in eastern Canada, who was director of a welfare planning council. But women just were not too acceptable at that time, I don't think. So I would have to say I was probably more of an interim person. That was really blazing a trail, because you have your primary volunteers are going to be president of Tell and Tell, or of 3 or 4 banks put together or something, and to meet them at the California Club or somewhere to prepare the agenda, and their business associates are asking who is this lady you were with at lunch that other day? It was still a societal type of problem where the woman staff person as director would be having her conferences and so on with the big businessman. And those were the people who were the leaders in most community chest and planning councils, usually the president, the president, vice president, and especially the treasurer. So I'd say, yeah, it was an unusual situation, but I don't think that's not true anymore. Number one, the councils aren't as strong or as tied to the business interests as they used to be, and women are certainly more acceptable in all kinds of administrative positions now.
Now, and yet, as I recall also, as research director, you involved a lot of these same people on committees to work with you in terms of the research. Like I remember Bob Doxson from Security Pacific, and there were a couple of other people, Taxpayers Association. They didn't seem to have that attitude,
no.
did they?
Well,
and was it because of a different role?
First thing, they were younger and more, accustomed to. But for the substantial business leader who is 65 years old or something in that age group, that is they were not on the study committees and task forces. It was the younger leadership in the community whenever we had a young businessman come on a committee. And we had quite a few of those. And we were beginning to get them. I think it was an emerging thing that they, if it was continued, we could have continued to get in more of the middle-aged business people or those who were I'd say really top, it was your top leadership. But we were getting the young ones coming up.
I'm going to shut it for a minute. Okay, after you left, I know that after that interim period as director of the Welfare Planning Council, you left for an interesting job in Washington. Could you share some of your experiences with that, and what were you able to bring to that Washington job from California?
That was a big jump, because my experience had been so wrapped up in, we'll say, education, social work education interests, and in voluntary work. To be plunged into government at the federal level with big-time Senate Finance Committee, House Finance Committee, and holding what you'd call the black book, that is all the facts and figures to brace the commissioner when giving testimony, or giving testimony myself sometimes, and having what is really picking out studies and research that would influence a budget of millions and millions rather than just the small budget was a big jump. But I think what I brought from the small town, not the small town, but from the local level to the federal government was a multidisciplinary understanding and not being, I was acquainted and I was not fearful about jumping right into almost any kind of service that was on the agenda that was financed or considering being or being introduced as a bill or a program to be followed. For example, mental retardation came in with a big burst at that time. Well, I had that too. Mention most any kind of service, and this little micro world right here in the Los Angeles area had a sample of everything. So this was a big urban area, and I brought a very broad experience in terms of a whole range of services. I wasn't confined to any one.
Jen, excuse me for interrupting. What year was that you went there, and what was your exact title?
I was director of Research Division. That would be Office of the Commissioner and Welfare Administration, Health, Education, and Welfare. I was not in education, nor was I in the health end. I was in the broad welfare administration that had Medicaid and Medicare and the administration on the aging and family services and Children's Bureau and the agencies familiar to most social workers.
And that was what year that you went?
63.
Oh, okay, thanks.
At that time, there was the theme was implementation of the 62 amendments, where a social work approach was to be implemented throughout the AFDC programs, where the workers at the local level were to have had some training in, we'll say, at least some social work methods, and many of them began to employ some social workers, and the results were somewhat overpromised, shall we say, and that the AFDC caseload, instead of being reduced, expanded and expanded. We understand why, is that whenever a program is revised and improved and made public by eligibility criteria, it takes 3 or 4 years to build up the program to a level of stabilization, and nobody had figured on that. So that it wasn't, we did our evaluations and or some of our analyses of what was happening was a little bit on the crisis side because of the way the caseload was going at that time. So I learned sometimes the hard way about a social policy and what kind of information and knowledge would influence the budget at the federal level. One time, part of the time we would be on, we'll say, unmarried mothers, which was certainly one of the programs in the Los Angeles area. Now, the terminology is interesting how it has changed. We talk about teenage pregnancy now, and we have different names, but I would say the same kinds of concerns that were present in the 30s and 40s are right back with us in the 80s with maybe a revised vocabulary, and the same kinds of things are being proposed. Welfare reform is again up for consideration, and much money was spent in the 60s on welfare reform models. I don't know how anyone can think up anything new, but maybe they can. But all of them were tested and at the expense of millions of dollars. And it was shown rather clearly that it does not affect employment, that people will not quit their jobs, that the AFDC caseload will turn over 1/3 each year, and there can't all be can't be generation after generation. That no matter how much training is done for jobs, and unless there are jobs at the other end, and there's work for people, just as there was, we saw this in the wartime. How many people went, and the unemployment was just wasn't there. It was everybody was working. So that these lessons we've learned come in cycles. You can see them very plainly from the federal level, but just on a bigger scale. I'd say the same kind of tensions were there. The studies were bigger. the amounts available for study and for research and surveys in the 60s and early 70s was a delight to work with. You can't even find the remains of those grants anymore. They've just gone. They melted away. In a time of expansion, there's always an effective use of research for planning programs. In a time of retrenchment, of cutting, there's really not nearly the amount of research and fact-finding necessary, because there are other kinds of rationale used for cutting rather than information and facts about needs or utilization. One other area that opened up in the 60s that I think has affected social work and has certainly affected research is the whole area of gerontology, and especially social gerontology. In previous years, if we look at all of our statistics, whether it's a census or no matter what kind of figures we're looking at about population, most of the studies would say 65 plus, which means that you don't bother after 65, that they're all cut from the same cookie cutter, and if you've seen one old person, you've seen them all. But now that with the lengthening lifespan, and not the lengthening lifespan, the lifespan as a species remains about 115 years, that's the same. But people are living more of a lifespan, and that they, therefore we have this increasing number in the 80s and the 90s. I think it's very clever, whoever first introduced it, that the 85 is the old. We have the young elderly and sort of the middle elderly, and we have the old elderly, so that we don't see them as just one big blur now or a statistical ghost, because they're real people and they're increasing all around us, and especially we're facing up to the utilization of hospital and medical care, and the proportion of resources that are going to older people, and and studies are particularly important now as to how we're going to handle the long-term care programs and older people who don't have the family help to take care of them. What's going to happen? So some of these issues are new, and particularly the issues where the care of the elderly is increased by deterioration in mental status, Alzheimer's, and related disorders, that we have these problems before us, and there's a whole wide arena for research and study, but with not too much money being turned loose for research or trying to find answers. Each community now is, to use the words sometimes used, its own creative, challenging efforts to handle their own. I don't know what's going to happen as more and more the federal says the state should handle it, and the states say the localities must handle their own problems, but nobody passes along any money to do this. So for those who come after me, maybe there's the creative work and the challenge will be more important than it's ever been. Another change, I think, that as my own lifespan moves along, is these concepts of privatization, the health industry, the home service industry, the contract bids for prisons and care of delinquents. It is moving along as if it were, it's a marketing type of operation and enterprise, and this is a new look and something we have to adapt to for those of us who've thought of social work and social welfare services in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and so on. And it's here to stay. We're talking about HMOs and how to compute capitation rates, how to compute the risk, how to compute insurance rates. Those were unheard of back in the Welfare Planning Council days. Each hospital just figured out how much it cost and tried to make go by sending out the bills. Now everything must fit in to the reimbursement formula and the regulations and some of the bureaucratic procedures that must be followed, or there are no funds to take care of the service. So that these are new things coming along, and that there have to be changes, and this affects what the kind of research is being done or the kind of investigations. To use the word marketing is very common now in every private agency, and with the formula that any private agency should have at least 7% profit or 5% profit. This is I think even more so that this sort of wakes me up now and then is the sort of rewards paid executives, administrators of health facilities, nursing homes, and all. If the costs are kept, because cost containment is kept within a certain level, then the bonus comes Christmas time for the administrator and the executive, not the rest of the staff, but the one who managed to keep that cost capitation at a certain level. So these are things that now are part of the whole social work and welfare picture, and that's for others to pick up the torch and carry. I think one of the things I learned very most at the federal level is that the research study on the research product is very important when it is within the direction of the policy being taken. It reinforces it, it moves it along fast, and it works well. If, no matter how good the research product is, or how appropriate or opportune, if it is not in the direction of the policy that controls the budget and the money, then nothing's going to happen, and the money expended has really been wasted. Well, you've got knowledge, but too often the information and knowledge is not properly brought together so that the next decade can use it. If we have it's strange, one administration does some very excellent work, then the next administration at the federal level will come in and think, well, the previous administration couldn't possibly have done anything very good. So we just begin over again and ask the questions a little differently, and then we will provide the knowledge. So this goes on one administration after another, and the continuity and the integration of a continuation of the research stream or the factual and the information stream is lost. A lot of money is lost because there's no way of sort of containing this knowledge. So if I move back from the federal level, come back to the community at USC and the regional research center there, the work was primarily on a grants and demonstration basis. It was a more, let's say, contained and simplified type of program, at least in volume, than we were conducting at the federal level, where there were 50 people in the in-house research program and 25 PhDs keeping you hustling all the time in different areas, demography, welfare economics, and different services, so that it was I would say a pleasant atmosphere where you had time to do a little thinking and where you could also teach again, and it was at a level where it's more face to face, so that for the several years there it was on grants, social welfare primarily, the WIN programs, and other training programs. And training program research is still being supported to some extent. I don't know what's going on now in terms of the grants available, but I think that will continue to go. After the last several years at USC, then as I moved on my...
Excuse me, Jen, that was a period, what, 68 to 73 or something like that?
Yes, 74, I believe, 69 to 74 in there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, in the interlude, I was a visiting professor at Melbourne in Australia, where it was the most pleasant and happy year. With where I came in as a scarce commodity with an occupational permit, so that I could work and at the university, and with social survey and one or two doctor's dissertations that they had federal funds for to the School of Social Studies, the School of Social Work. So then back to the Gerontology Center in Los Angeles, and again this brought in the story of the elderly population. And particularly my interest was in case management and integration of services for the individual old person, and it's and the development of the informal support system and the family helpers and all, which is a very interesting and productive area to study and then to use in program development. It works so well in a community where you have the home health agencies, and there's some purchase and there's some budget to buy these services and augment the family health. So that's been an academic interest, and one sharing authorship of one textbook, and really directing my interest when I moved back to New Mexico after I had 3 retirements practically. Yeah. So that my interest then was to as a volunteer to give service, and staying very much in the same way. And I've done I do proposals. I set up reporting forms, do evaluations. Very much the same thing I used to do in the Welfare Planning Council. Work with task force groups, do subcommittee reports, and but giving my time, so that as this career moves along and comes to a close, my rewards were not in money. That was in the satisfaction of giving in a constructive way. And it was nice to receive the state award for outstanding volunteer in New Mexico, and I was very proud when I was voted into the Hall of Fame for senior citizens in the Albuquerque area, with the big banquet and all, and then the numerous certificates and letters of thanks and all, so that there's always something that you can continue doing. And actually it's modeled pretty much after the old Welfare Planning Council research pattern, with study and research and community participation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jen. I really appreciate this.
How much do we have?